Beijing on the 2nd of December, 2021, and it is 7:53 or 54 now on the east coast of the United States of America.
It is December 1st.
December 1st, yes. You're in the past.
Yes.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to the MTT News of the Week. Welcome, Jen. Good to have you back.
Great to be here.
All right. So, yes, as you know, if you've been watching us, we're going to be covering the headlines of the week and also news from communist parties and workers' parties around the world. Again, every week, it seems, is an interesting week. There's always something to talk about. There's always something going on. And this week, obviously, we have to cover Omicron, which we'll speak to you about in a moment. Barbados became a republic. An ISIS fighter was convicted of genocide. The first person to be convicted of genocide against the Yazidis. He was convicted in Germany. There are openings for discussion on the nuclear deal or nuclear talks between Iran and the US and other people. Sweden re-elected the female prime minister that failed.
Had for 4 hours.
But that was the president for prime minister last week for 4 hours. Then Honduras also had an election, as well as the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell began. And of course, we have some news about the tennis star from China, as well as the allegation of an airport being stolen by China in Africa, Ugandan airport. And of course, then also some news from the CPs, particularly messages of solidarity to the Palestinian people, as of course we had the International Day of Solidarity for Palestine at the end of November. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So first, Jen, let's talk about Omicron, the very ominously named, grim-sounding variant, Omicron. So what are your thoughts on that one?
Firstly, I think through COVID, I'm starting to learn the entire Greek alphabet, first of all.
Sure.
And this is very unfortunate because because the trait that was recognized in the scientific world of the highly mutagenic capabilities of COVID-19. This was understood ever since I would say March to April of 2020 in China. And so, but how this virus is specifically very, very disturbing and truly ominous, even from a scientific perspective, is that it defies the laws of conventional understandings of virology or just evolution. So typically, as a biological thing, your goal is to survive and pass on your genes and spread. So in order to do that, you don't want to kill your host if you are a parasitic.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So usually how viruses evolve over time is it decreases in lethality and severity whilst increases in contagious. So we had the influenza virus that was named as the Spanish flu back in the day, and now it's just the common cold, right? That's what people expected. That's what the whole world expected to see with COVID-19. But clearly it isn't. So now we kind of, when we're looking at the entire COVID pandemic, we kind of have to almost throw out some of these assumptions of conventional understandings of virology and biology and evolution and just take even a further step back towards just like a kind of mechanical philosophical view of simply does this thing continue to rise in lethality? Yes or no? Yes. Is there anything to stop it? In nature, not human intervention. In nature, naturally on its own. No. Therefore, we're arriving to the conclusion that we cannot help but say that COVID will not be over until the whole world starts to do what the communist countries are doing. as in the physical elimination of the virus from the environment through through swift and effective quarantines and total quarantines, and the
Vaccination.
the disinfectants being sprayed across the whole place, and close monitoring and
as well as vaccination too. Yeah.
Yes, but here's the thing. The concern with the Omicron variant, I mean, it's been kind of noticed ever since the Delta variant and the earlier Alpha, Beta, Omu variants, that this virus has the ability to evade the detection of the human immune system, and or surpass and thereby surpass natural or artificial, so like vaccine artificial immunity. And given that, so the earliest case of this kind of highly mutagenic capabilities was back in fall towards winter of 2020. There was a gentleman in Boston who has had COVID for 141 days. He's had some sort of he was not in very good health, had pre-existing conditions. So like for the whole duration of 141 days, he was bedridden in the hospital the whole time. So he was inside a hospital. His whole life was arranged by hospital staff professionals. And yet he got reinfected 4 times.
Right.
It's been quite a while since then, but if I can recall correctly, the first time the virus attacked his lungs, the second time it attacked his kidneys, the third time the virus attacked his liver, and the fourth time it gave him a heart attack, and he unfortunately passed. And through this one patient alone, on his body, after that whole 141-day period, they were able to discover 30 plus something variants of COVID-19 alone, just from his body, of just one person. Yes.
So the mutations inside his body, 30 different mutations.
The mutations are a result of, essentially, the more immunocompromised a person is, the more this virus kind of plays a game of chance to create more possible variants. So, especially in a region like the southern regions of Africa, where HIV is rampant, the health experts suggested that it may be because this exact same thing was happening in undiagnosed HIV patients. This whole exact 140 plus day process. We've seen these kind of stuff with a less severe case of that with a woman in Russia who was infected and bedridden for 90 something days with the exact same thing, and 20 something variants out of her body alone. Luckily, she survived. So what does this mean for us? It means that the more human bodies it infect, the more variants there will be. And the more possibilities of a stronger version there, the devastating version there will become, and the cycle will simply continue, and it does not end. Now, understand this, on top of it, even before the Omicron discovery, we have seen COVID-19 infecting animals. Essentially, it has been the earliest evidence of that was in New York City. There's zoo.
Cats.
I don't know.
The lions, right?
The lions and tigers. And now we have seen traces of COVID in the sewage of New York City with rats. That was a month ago. No, that was a month and a half ago, before we even started this program. And in Michigan, there is a massive amount of deer that was infected when they did testing. Infected by COVID-19. So you have to understand that every new human body the COVID virus gets to is one more possibility for the virus to become more lethal and more powerful.
Right.
And with billions of human and animal bodies around the world working nonstop as essentially an upgrading factory and research lab
Yeah,
for
a testing ground.
to help the virus to defeat humanity. And the fact that the capitalist liberal world, upon contact with COVID-19, has just given up.
Yeah. I think that's an important. Yeah, it's an important point.
Right. So coming at it from a philosophical perspective, it truly will not be over because nothing is interfering.
I see.
Yeah.
I mean, talking about cases, right? So yeah, what we're saying here is that the more people that catch this virus means that the virus can experiment and go through its natural selection processes more and more and find and the variations, the mutations that occur on hundreds or millions or billions of times. They find the perfect combination to beat more immune system. So it's a testing ground, a massive experimenting testing ground. So yeah, the more people that catch it, the longer it stays. And yeah, so if you have countries that are okay with 60,000 cases per day or 40,000 cases per day, even if the lethality is low, you're just you're just allowing.
They are contributing towards
exactly. Then
arms race of this virus against humanity.
Yeah, and that means then, of course, then there are just so many variations of the virus that then eventually there is a mutation that is more lethal. So you're like, oh well, everyone has it. It's just like the cold, but all of a sudden it mutates, and now you have 10 different new viruses, at least 10. Let's just say 10, which are deadly. So and that's again where you have a problem. Yeah. So
with the Omicron variant specifically, then it has the tendency of essentially, we don't know yet because it has only been detected for 5 to 6 days as we speak. But what it is that the only way to explain this dramatic kind of surge in South Africa, the province of Gauteng, Galbng, correct me if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly.
Wait, Gautang?
Galbeng. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And the general kind of numbers in South Africa, we're seeing this is just a rough calculator math from the number released onto Google by WHO and the South African government. Lethality rate is about 6%. So we are right back as if we were at the beginning of COVID, as if we didn't know how to treat this virus and people were just dying naturally without any kind of effective medical intervention. And we are looking at essentially, it either has to be way more contagious than Delta, or it has to not only be more contagious, but it has to also be able to surpass the already existing immunity in the human population. Most likely, it is a mix of both. That is the consensus right now. And the way we're going to find that out is through data over the past over the next 1.5 weeks. But what this means is that essentially there is two kinds of scenarios where Omicron is not that much more contagious, only twice as much contagious as the Delta variant, but it is able to. That's already nightmare. It is able to overcome 93% of the existing immunities, naturally or vaccine based.
Naturally or vaccine? Surely there would be a difference between the two.
We are not too sure yet, because what it does is that the virus has been noted, not just Omicron, all COVID, it's been noted to delete and manipulate sections of its own DNA that is used by the human immune cells to recognize it. It's called the spike protein. So think our body's T cells, the cells that scans the virus, is the scanner in like a grocery store that scans the barcode, and the spike protein is the barcode. It constantly changes its own barcode, or just straight up deletes the section and doesn't have a barcode altogether. That's one of the most worrisome kind of things about COVID in general, and the
Right.
fact that the virus can pass through the blood-brain barrier, which means which usual viruses don't do, by the way.
Okay.
It attacks the brain, creates neurological tissue damage in the brain, causes all sorts of issues.
Right.
In all seriousness, we have not even begun as a species to see the damage.
Long-term effects. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That is long-term damages
Yeah.
is caused
Yeah.
by COVID-19,
Yeah.
and even before we could do that, we are already seeing um, the Omicron and whatever is next to come until we run out of the entire Greek alphabet,
Right.
and then we're gonna have to come up with something else. Right. So to tie it into a bit of another topic, this recognition, this understanding was what led to an extremely panic response by the world governments. Israel locked down their border. Canada is,
Right.
and all the nations are banning travel.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, it's gonna be kind of directed at South Africa and Botswana
Yeah.
for just the same reason that it was directed towards China. This kind of lockdown kind of mentality, right? But it doesn't help. Why? Because it's already all over the place.
Well, this is what I wanted to mention is that that virus was detected. They found it in South Africa, and luckily,
but it was
first found. So they first sequenced it and tested it and identified it. However, I think it's already been reported that someone in Holland had the virus. So he was in hospital for COVID, but they just thought it was normal COVID or Delta COVID.
Correct.
And after they sequenced and found, identified how to identify this new variant, Omicron variant.
That is correct.
They said this guy had already had it before it had been detected in South Africa. So
right.
This is the classic problem that we've had throughout the entirety of the virus. Is that
sure,
Wuhan was where we found it first, but there's stories about someone in Italy having it, and also we're not even certain because there was so much spread so quickly. It was actually far more established than we thought than when we detected it in China. But the thing about that was a lot of the South African scientists were quite disgruntled, let's say.
Of course.
They've been punished. So even though a big cluster was found in South Africa,
you're punished for discovering it and sharing the news, and sounding the alarm.
Exactly, and I mean, okay. In all fairness, though, it's good to see governments being a bit more hard line about it and being restrictive. So I don't think we should sort of say you should have been more strict on COVID and then also berate them when they do have hard measures. I mean, China will also shut its borders to various countries because of this variant. So it's a fair policy.
Want to bring it into like a more strategic kind of level, what are the strategic implications of this kind of realization of the virus? One is that the vaccine strategy will not work for preventing COVID from an attrition perspective.
It depends. I think it depends. But go ahead. Yeah.
Well, think about it this way. So Pfizer has released a statement that it takes them 100 days of their expert scientists, doctors working, overtime essentially, for 100 whole days to develop this new vaccine for Omicron, right? But it takes Mother Nature, if you want to even call it that. It takes the ecosystem and the whole planet way less time to come up with a new variant that becomes dominant.
If you left things as they were, I mean, if you imposed measures and restricted exchanges between people, then you could.
Then it could work. But the thing with this virus is that as long as it is not completely wiped out from the face of the earth, then even if you have, say, a majority of the world being relatively managed well, it does not work because that kind of nature itself and human society itself, especially the overexploited countries,
Mm-hmm.
who don't have this kind of medical, scientific, human or material resource,
Mm-hmm.
as long as they are still there, then COVID will use those territories as incubators to
Right.
then go for round two, round three, round four, until
Mm-hmm.
infinity and beyond against all of human
Mm-hmm.
society.
Mm.
And it's a losing attritional war. Why? Because every human body, and in the future, every animal body is an incubator, is a
Yeah.
laboratory.
Yeah.
Whereas, I don't care how wealthy and powerful and advanced Pfizer or Moderna is, they only
Yeah.
have a few laboratories.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
You know,
I mean,
so
I think we can be. I don't think it's impossible. I think it's very difficult and perhaps unlikely that we can, beat it if we keep doing things the way we do, particularly with vaccination. So
well,
just so for China, it has 1.4 billion people, and it managed to reach nearly zero, and also zero for a number of
but
days at least. On a continental scale, and you talk about more than a seventh of the population,
but the
and
amount of
one second. So just on vaccination, it has been working, but the problem is the inconsistency. So people are getting the booster jabs in developed countries when people haven't had their first jab in underdeveloped countries. So whether it's Latin America or
oh,
Africa or the Middle East, you still have huge populations where, as we've just learned, if you don't vaccinate these populations, that breeding ground where the virus can test itself and then become this variation that can beat vaccines, first and second dose vaccines. So I think it can be beaten, but the vaccination program has to be comprehensive. So you have to have everyone being vaccinated on scale before you can start doing booster jabs and stuff. I mean,
the
you can still do booster jabs because you want to
the
protect your body.
unfortunate
Yeah.
thing with that is that nature is simply faster than people in regards to this. So even when you have a situation like China, where
Mm-hmm.
inside its territory, it's perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
The scientific system, apparatus, industry, whatever you want to call that, is unable to keep up with not any human entity, but the trillions of life forms of mammalian life on planet Earth. That's the
Mm-hmm.
problem. So,
Mm-hmm.
what it would truly require is if every country on Earth somehow magically became like China.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, that's very difficult. You know,
Sure. Sure.
it's
Sure. 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 Sure.
almost I would say like that's impossible. Why? Because to quote Lenin, they're still stuck in the highest stage of capitalism,
Right.
imperialism.
Right. Right. Right.
And
Right.
that train has momentum, a historical
Yeah.
momentum of hundreds
Yeah.
of years. You cannot just change that
No,
overnight.
yeah, sure. So I
Yeah.
think my point is that it's not impossible. It is possible to do it, but whether current governments and current arrangements around the world,
Uh,
the balance of economics
right.
and the balance of,
We can
money, I guess it. Like I said, I don't think it's likely, but I wouldn't say it's
yeah.
impossible. I don't think
we
it's
can
a
agree to disagree here because mechanically it's not in the interest of the capitalist or feudal ruling class
mhm,
to sacrifice its profit to defend the
mhm,
lives of the people. So therefore, it would be to say that if a person who had a gun could defend themselves from a wild predator, but if they are firmly anti-gun or just have no idea how to
then
even
they can't.
operate
Yes,
the
sure,
gun,
sure, sure.
then even though yes, the gun can work, no, the person won't work, and
Right,
therefore, when we overall like look at the whole picture comprehensively, if a person simply won't do something, then
yes,
that's kind of set in stone. And this is what we've always seen out of the Western governments.
mhm,
Well, it's like the infamous quote from the Yes Prime Minister show. The four-step standard response protocol is that
right,
of the Foreign Office is step one, nothing's happening. Step two, something may be happening, but we shouldn't do anything about it.
mhm,
Step three is something maybe things are happening, but there's nothing we can do. Step 4 is maybe we should have done something, but it's too late now.
It's too late now.
But yeah, no. So with this kind,
so right, I guess that's it, right? We have the tools, but we don't have governments that have. We don't have the governments that are willing to do it. So it is possible, but not with these people. Okay,
precisely. Precisely.
Yeah,
and it was this kind of understanding that we saw Dow Jones crashed like 900 points in one day.
Okay.
Because essentially the capitalists of the world understood what we are talking about here.
It's pretty bad news. I mean, this variant is pretty cataclysmic. It's going to take us a few weeks. Obviously, it's only been 1 week. So some of the estimates are saying that you need 3 weeks before you can see true lethality, and then you need 6 weeks before you see how many people actually caught it. Really, that's the sadness of it. And over Christmas, over the festive period, people were hoping to go home. People were hoping this. It's been really a tragedy for a lot of people. But yeah, I guess that's enough for COVID and Omicron for today.
I agree.
Let's move on to some more sort of, I guess, standard political news and non-virus stuff. So a nice little story we've got is Barbados. Barbados has become a republic, the world's newest bourgeois republic. Let's just use the correct terminology here. But I mean, so they've no longer have Queen Elizabeth as the head of their state, which of course Australia and Canada and Jamaica and various other countries still do have constitutional democracies or constitutional monarchy. Sorry, they have her as the head, even though she doesn't technically do anything. But I mean, I think if you listen to our podcast, we spoke to David Fox about this and how even though the Privy Council that used to sort of help govern Australia, even though they don't have direct power, it's still somewhat, I guess, aristocratic or undemocratic to have, even if the Queen or King or Prince can whisper in the ear of the leadership, it's still a voice that is unfair. I mean, she doesn't have, there's no trade union that gets a guaranteed lunch with the Prime Minister. Or a guaranteed meeting or a guaranteed phone line. Homeless people don't get to phone into the government and speak to the Prime Minister directly, which is what the Queen and the royal families do. They have an imbalanced ear, which, yes, you can say we have a constitutional monarchy, so we have elections and all these parties and stuff. Correct, sure. But at the end of the day, there is a bit more of an ear. Yeah, it's still there. It's still not gone. So I mean, I think this is what the Barbadians, but I think they call themselves Barbasians. I'm not quite sure on that one. People from Barbados.
Exactly.
They don't want to have the head of their state to be a queen. And if you consider the history of slavery and African people that have been taken as slaves, I think it's a nice end to that chapter of the history. And in all fairness, I think I do actually. Prince Charles was given did the handover, for lack of a better term, and he actually had quite a nice little segment, which I'll read to you in a moment.
He fall asleep during the occasion?
Not this time.
Okay.
But, go ahead, get your thoughts on that one, Jen, and I'll find this quote.
Okay, sure. Well, I mean, first of all, congratulations for getting rid of monarchy. I mean, good Lord. Yeah, but it's the overall sign, and we're gonna see with the Honduras election that we're gonna cover on later on. It's a sign of essentially Anglo-Saxon imperialism, which has dominated the world ever since I would say the days of Queen Victoria, if you want to look at it like that. That kind of imperialist tradition is weakening. And that's why you are able to see, the British influence being kind of resisted and pushed out gradually by just the local people. And later on with Honduras and the entire pink wave in South America, we will see American influences are getting kicked out of South America, which is hasn't happened ever since the days of the Monroe Doctrine. Which is quite historic.
Right. Yes, actually, we'll come on to this. Actually, let me give you this quote, and then we can discuss the Honduras element of the story, which is obviously related, as you say, because the same region and the pink tide, as we call it. So this is Charles giving a speech. Obviously, said many things, but one of the things he said was, "From the darkest days of our past, and the appalling atrocity of slavery, which forever stains our history, the people of this island forged their path with extraordinary fortitude. Okay. So yeah, so a nice little handover there from the prince. Great. But yeah, let's talk about Honduras then. So this election, there's been an election in Honduras, and the candidate, her surname is Castro. I've just forgotten her first name. It's something with an X. But as you're saying there, Jen, the pink tide. So we're seeing, along with Peru, along with potentially with Brazil, with what's his name, De Lula. Not is it Lula? Lula coming back potentially after he's been let out of jail, and Bolsonaro, him going up against him, as well as Venezuela and other countries in South America. We are seeing potentially the resurgence of the pink tide or the pink wave of socialism.
Yeah. We kind of have to. I mean, this shows us. It confirms a thought that I've had in my head, and I've discussed with my friends for a long time. That essentially, the South American people really hasn't given up on the idea of socialism. Essentially, this is the best evidence that you could ask for that kind of observation. That no matter what means it's going to be done through, it is a kind of manifestation of the will of the people of the entire continent. And no matter how powerful an empire is, United States, you cannot suppress that forever. It's almost going like a bit not too dissimilar, at least in this perspective, going back to when Chairman Mao wrote on protracted war. One of his viewpoints is that the will of the people for progress, for a better society, for advancements, and for a better life is not something that will just go away. It's part of what it means to have human beings, unless the entire region was just annihilated with nuclear weapons. That would be the only exception. But if that is not the case, then an empire simply cannot outlast that kind of will of the indigenous people of the land. It's from a resource macroeconomics perspective, it's just unfeasible. It's unsustainable. You cannot keep it up forever. At certain points, you're going to a reactionary empire is going to run into in order to maintain their colonies, and when their economy is crashing, is degrading, in order to maintain that reactionary, high-cost, inefficient society, you have to invest more into the colonial project. But investing more into the colonial project is going to crash your economy even further and even faster. But then when your economy crashes faster, the only solution that these reactionary elites, ruling class, can see is investing more into the colonial imperialist project. And so it becomes a vicious cycle, that brings about the end of an empire. So this is clearly just what we're seeing with the United States. And the entire pink tide is just the perfect kind of demonstration for that kind of attritional, protracted principle.
Sure. Yeah. Just so I can get that correct, the first name is Xiomara, if that's how you pronounce it, Xiomara. Xiomara Castro is the candidate that is tipped to win. So technically hasn't won yet, but yeah. I mean, the main concern that the New York Times brings up is that she will re-ally with Venezuela and Cuba, which is obviously what the business elite in Honduras are concerned about. But I'd like to bring up a quick one about this one is the general politics of the region, so Central America and sort of northern Southern America.
Sure.
Is the statistic that sticks in my mind is there were 1.1 million people that crossed the border into America from Central and Northern South America. That's a lot of people. The populations of Central American countries is not that high. So to have 1 million people leave those collective regions, that's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. And it does beg the question as to, and it the fact that you've got a new candidate coming in and a change of the guard, so to speak, towards the pink tide, sort of more socialist candidate. I mean, I wouldn't call her the most progressive communist revolutionary leader, but she's, I guess, something towards the left. But yeah, I guess to have 1 million people leave Central America to try and pursue a better life, it shows you how terrible conditions must be for people in Central America. I mean, gangs, problems, and corruption, and all of these things. 1 million people is a huge amount of people to leave. That's a lot of people to leave.
I feel terrible for them because, they may have this illusion that the United States and Canada is better, and in terms of pure material goods, it is. But the United States, the American Empire, and Canada, which is just a part of the American Empire, is declining, deteriorating to the point where its collapse is imminent. So moving from one hellscape right into another hellscape.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's it. I mean,
I feel sympathy for these people. This is just a nightmare of a life, really. I mean, a person only has like 30 to 40 years of high quality life before because before that it's childhood. After that it's retirement, right? And it's
you don't place a premium on childhood, do you? Then
what?
Childhood is not something you see as a good life part of your life. Then.
Well, no, I mean like when you're kind of like actively making decisions for your own life, whereas like before that it's like your parents and your guardians doing that for you.
Yeah.
And all 30, 40 years of that is just going to be what? A massive long migrations through zones that are always like having nonstop gunfights.
Yeah. It's
what is that?
It shows you how bad things must be, and yeah, the promised land is certainly not as wonderful as it's painted out to be in films and elsewhere. But yeah. So yeah, we'll see. Obviously, this story will develop. Obviously, she's hasn't technically taken power yet, and hopefully she will. Hopefully, she does implement some policies which help the people of Honduras and come up with some sort of path of development that makes their life better, and kick out the drug cartels and the influence of the US too. Both kick out the US and the drug cartels. There's a couple of other minor stories we have from this week. So as I mentioned at the start, let's just clear some things that perhaps we need to just go over. So last week we talked about the Swedish female prime minister who broke the ceiling and became its first female prime minister, and then resigned 7 or a number of hours later, for 7 hours. Yes, I think that's an actual statistic. And now, less than a week later, she has been re-elected to a post, and we're hoping that we can get beyond that 7-hour window, which I think we have already now. It's been 3 days. So, okay. But I mean, just so that we can tie up a loose end, last week we didn't really say why or know why she had resigned. It was a fresh story then. It was because of a budget. So basically, a budget had been proposed in the parliament, and her coalition, which was supposed to vote for this budget and it to be one of their key policies. A budget is pretty important to a government. It failed, and the coalition collapsed. So that arrangement that she had, being European politics, is always based on coalitions and messy arrangements with all sorts of parties. That collapsed, and so she just gave up. So now they've had negotiations this week, and then returning to the job on Monday, they've come back to work and have put her as the prime minister. So she's back. Great. Of course, in some sections of the internet or the world, the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell has started. Thoughts on that one, Jin? Did Epstein kill himself?
Good Lord. No. I think this is like the only thing that the left and the right can agree on, is that Epstein didn't kill himself.
It's
I
don't want to go into this one too much. There's far more important to talk about, but it is interesting to see a member of, I just like this title. She's referred to as a socialite, Ghislaine Maxwell, the socialite. So what the hell is a socialite? Like whose job? That's her title. That's what she's known as. So it's
What?
a reflection of that sort of class. When you have so much money and you have so much
Right.
wealth, that your job is to be a socialite. And what do? Well, I host parties. I meet other rich people, and we fly on our planes. We go on holiday together, and maybe people will have meetings around me and stuff like that. It's
This
just
is
it's a job that the rest of us will never ever possibly
yeah,
even
suffering through
out there.
the champagnes and caviars and
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's hard labor
Yeah,
apparently.
right. Exactly. Yeah. So a socialite. So she's on trial. So if you don't know the story, she is the ex-partner of Jeffrey Epstein, who was on trial for sex trafficking and all types of sexual offenses. Underage girls were involved. It was pretty terrible stuff.
Yeah.
But the element of the story which has obviously captured everyone's attention is the fact that Epstein was so wealthy and so important and was friends with everyone, Donald Trump as well as the Clintons, as well as
Clintons.
everyone else. So
Yeah.
a real sort of insight into the elite, into the lives of the elite.
Yeah,
So
and it
talking
really
about
tells us what the not just from a moral perspective what kind of people they are, but the how they mentally think.
mm,
They think through kind of interpersonal connection building. They think through decadence. They think through making deals, and they think through depravity. Essentially, it's this kind of psychological thing where doing things that you can accomplish with money no longer brings them pleasure. Because so imagine like us working class people, we may look at like some very expensive food item that we cannot afford, and maybe like on holidays we save up some money and we purchased and enjoyed it. That would be like a big deal for us, right? But if you are the elites, then that is nothing to you. If
yeah,
you're the bourgeoisie, that is literally nothing. So what does it become? Well, all the entertainment and luxury in the world cannot bring you any
sure,
new, fresh experience. So what do you turn
yes,
to? You turn to depravity.
yeah, that's it. That's
And they kind of do this to essentially this is the classical sociopath mindset where like the sociopath has to be above everyone else, has to be able to manipulate everyone else for financial or what political power and gains and their own personal benefits. So like not to direct too far away from it, there was a case in South Korea where it was like, in fact, right after the Jeffrey Epstein event was public here in the United States, where through the encrypted app Telegram, it was discovered that in some group chats they were doing very similar things to Jeffrey Epstein, the South Korean capitalist monopolistic
right,
elites.
right.
So this is definitely not just a kind of exclusive phenomenon. And what I want to say, I guess, is that as socialists, it's more than we need to do more than just materially do different things than this kind. I seriously think that it's a kind of way of thinking, a way of mentality, and a way of life. Of are you motivated by just pleasure and income, or are you motivated by some higher ideal? Essentially, because even in the Soviet Union, first head, not the first, one of the early heads of the NKVD, Beria, was also a depraved person, just like Jeffrey Epstein. Even though he is the head of the intelligence service in the communist system, where you don't have that kind of Western kind of stuff. So what does that teach us? It teaches us that we need a kind of mentality that was a very favorite book of mine is How the Steel Was Tempered. It was written in the Soviet Union. All of the us Chinese kids probably read it at one point or another in our middle to high school life. It talks about essentially you as socialists, we rest our kind of heart and soul, if you're religious, in the fact that we are fighting for the greatest goal that there could ever be, which is the liberation and improvement of all of humanity. And that is where we find joy through. We find joy through working towards that goal, and whatever we accomplish towards that goal is when we see that we have made people's lives better.
Right.
I think like I do believe that we need that kind of mentality as people, as human beings, so that we can just avoid this kind of bourgeois mode of exploitative thinking once and for all.
Yeah, definitely. I think hedonism and sort of only living for immediate material pleasures, it does lead to depravity.
Right.
Sort of people get bored. You get bored of drinking this. You have a stronger alcohol. You get bored of this. So you have to do sort of more extreme things. You get addicted to this form of adrenaline. So you have to go something more and more. You have to push the boundaries more and more because you get bored. The next extreme is not enough. You need to go further and further and further.
Exactly.
And reasons to get to that. Yeah. I mean,
that's addiction.
And conspicuous consumption as well. I mean, this is an ancient, well, not ancient. This is a very old and a true economic phenomenon. Conspicuous consumption. The desire to try and find things to show your wealth more and more. And this is why we have things like the way in which the bourgeois consumes art. You sort of have paintings that reflect the value reflects nothing to do with the substance. You have it's worth $2 billion.
It's about kind of are we motivated by addiction? Are we only motivated by when we are rewarded by some material thing, or are we able to surpass that? Because if you don't, then addiction falls into the whole kind of behavioralist psychology and cybernetics kind of theories, where it's all about like how a bourgeois society would manage manipulate people through desensitization and then punishment and rewards. And that's what it means to be, alienated by capitalism. So as socialists, in order to avoid that kind of alienation by capitalism, we have to not just cut off ourselves from the rest of the world and enter our own little echo chamber. The point is to give ourselves a brand new set of motivators that is for socialism, not just for being rewarded and being punished.
Sure. I mean, actually, we've kind of gone into it. I mean, it's been good tangent, but I guess we're only going to just talk about Ghislaine Maxwell briefly. But let's just try and cover some of the stories. It is true, though, what we're saying, though, in terms of the ideology and the ideals and what motivates us and how this relates to, as you say, even though in a socialist society you can still have depravity, you can still have problems like this, and so it's important to match your ideals and your sort of aspirations with a higher goal, and of course a better society and all that kind of stuff. So yes, let's talk about. We have a nice story. I suppose it is a good story. It's a bad story with some sort of good progress, let's say. Particularly what I'm talking about is an ISIS fighter who was captured, of course, has been convicted of a crime against humanity. He's been convicted of in the role of the genocide of the Yazidi people. He was convicted in Germany. So he went on trial for, basically, he had a 5-year-old girl, and I think it's her mother too. And the girl, he was punishing this young girl, the 5-year-old, and he tied her up outside to a post, and she died of from thirst, from dehydration, and in the sun. So that was the specifics that they managed to get him on the trial, and he was convicted. So good news to a terrible piece of history. Well, I guess recent history. 2015 is when we're talking about. But yes, he was convicted this week. It's good. But what are your thoughts on that one, Jin? About the conviction?
I mean, obviously, it's great news.
Mm,
But I am suspecting that there is Okay, so for context,
mm,
about a month ago, 3 to 4, maybe yeah, 3 to 4 weeks ago, one of the official podcasts of the West Point Military Academy of the United States military released this episode talking about the threats of future terrorism. Essentially, they won't admit to this, but essentially, due to the failing of the United States in the Middle East, which created all
mm.
this
Yeah,
destruction and deterioration, it's as now that the U.S. has pulled out of it, it has become this kind of place of massive power vacuums and
yeah,
potentially become hotbed for new terrorist activities. And so then it is a moment in time where the interest of the United States and China, Russia, I mean the Union State, and the rest of the world, really,
mhm,
and the people of all the world has intersected on this one point,
mhm,
which
mhm,
is stopping, uh, just radical terrorism,
mm, mm, mm,
international radical terrorism that is
mhm,
purely kind of caused by an unbelievable kind of level of degradation of society and lack of hope
mhm,
in the
mhm.
region, poverty, and then just purely fueled and brainwashed by ideology to the point where they're willing to travel all over the world and become international fighters, right? To cause, to enact. Right now, I guess now we can officially say it, to enact literal crimes against
Yeah,
humanity,
yes, yes,
against all sorts of people across the Afro-Eurasian continent.
right,
Um,
right, right.
so it's a good thing,
Mm, mm.
even though like it was because the U.S. is at its weakest moment. It's still good that we've made some progress to truly see this threat as like where it is.
Yeah, yeah,
Truly
yeah, yeah.
code into the system of law that it is crime against humanity, and this will open up the. I don't know if they use precedents there in the European system of
I'm not
law,
sure. I'm not sure.
but it opens up a good kind of reference to like how we would indeed go about treat or the United Nation
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
would go about dealing with this kind of
Yeah, yeah. No, it's good
things in the
progress.
future.
Good
Yeah.
progress on there. But I do like your point about it's good that these guys, these international jihadists, have been.
Uh,
We're now starting to see that they are being arrested and punished for their horrible atrocities against all
mhm.
sorts of people in the Middle East. But yeah, we shouldn't forget how did we end up here? And I think
It's because of the war
I'm going to
criminals that
well,
are
exactly.
not
Well,
punished.
also specifically Iraq. I mean, to paraphrase the words of Saddam Hussein, I think it was at his trial
Uh,
when they put him on trial.
yeah.
Uh, he said, "You know, you've opened the gates of hell. You have opened the gates of hell with this invasion, with what's going on right now. What's happened? By disassembling Iraq." He said, "You've opened the gates of hell," and we really did see that. With
Yeah.
what ISIS became and what it did, and then bleeding into Syria and bleeding to now all over the world, Afghanistan and Mozambique, and
Mhm.
every inch of the world now has got some form of threat or risk.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, we'll see. There'll obviously be more of these, hopefully, more of these convictions against these horrible Islamic fundamentalists.
Mhm.
The next story we were going to talk about the nuclear talks that will be coming with China,
Mhm.
nuclear arms talks. However, I don't think we have time.
Yeah.
We don't have time, so I do have to kind of stick to our 1 hour rule. So we're going to jump straight to just the three big stories,
Mhm.
and then we'll finish with our message to the Palestinian people from the Israeli Communist Party. So
Mhm.
China, we had sort of three stories this week. Sorry, two. We're skipping the nuclear arms deal. Sorry, we're talking about the two stories that were not stories, the two big non-stories. So actually,
Right.
last week, we didn't cover this last week because we thought it was ridiculous, but it's now still in the news. This story of the tennis star. So Peng
Mhm.
Shui, there were allegations that she was missing. So she made allegations against one of the prominent Communist Party leader
Mhm.
about sexual misconduct, rape allegations, and whatnot. And then the Western media had said that she disappeared. And then she hadn't. And then they found videos of her at a tennis club and at a restaurant. And she made a video call to some form of sports association. So it really was one of these examples of a story that isn't a story, a classic sort of North Korean thing. Of, Kim Jong-un has executed his brother using an aircraft cannon. And then he is in a parade next week. So in the same vein as creating stories that aren't even there. She's missing. No, she isn't. And the next one, which is more nefarious and more important for us to actually mention, is this airport deal. So this also popped up. Another story that was a non-story. So allegations that China had taken control of Uganda's only international airport. And this was reported, and many people made videos about this, the fact that they used the words, they said, it has been taken over. It has been occupied. China is in control of Entebbe International Airport. And it isn't. It didn't happen. It's another one of these stories that didn't happen. So I'm just going to read something which relates to this. So obviously the grander story of this one is the idea of debt diplomacy or debt trap diplomacy, and how China takes over infrastructure and takes it from countries, which is the allegation made. And the first story that everyone usually mentions for this is the Sri Lankan port that apparently was taken over by China. So I'm going to read you the story that perhaps is a bit more detailed and gives us the information that we should know about the story. And it's from The Diplomat. So this is on that port deal that everyone always references, but the details of which are not really shared. And the sad truth is that it's actually a really boring story. And I'll give you the conclusion. Spoiler alert, China doesn't control that port. It's still controlled by Sri Lanka. So I'm just going to skim read some of the stuff from The Diplomat. One second. So let's start from over here. So one second. Okay, so for starters, the Hambantota port deal cannot be interpreted as a debt in equity swap or the Chinese cancelling debt in exchange for controlling of the port. Although that seems to be a well-established narrative, the Sri Lankan government is still obliged to pay off 5 loans obtained from the Exim Bank of China to construct the Hambantota port, and the agreement pertaining to those loans have not been amended. The loans were not defaulted, and the loan agreements remain unchanged. In that sense, the port lease cannot be interpreted as a debt equity swapped, which refers to a cancellation of debt in exchange for the equity of an asset. In this case, there was no cancellation of the debt. Instead, a 70% stake of the port was leased to China Merchants Port Holdings Company Limited, CM Port, for 99 years for $1.1 billion. This $1.1 billion, however, was not used to pay off the debt obtained to construct the port. This significant dollar inflow was used to strengthen the current's foreign reserves and make some short-term foreign debt repayments. To be precise, it is fair to say that the money earned from the Haban port deal was largely used to cover balance of payment issues relating to largely from the soaring debt servicing cost, while Sri Lanka's export and FDI inflow growth remained sluggish. In August 2017, Sri Lanka's cabinet ministers took a decision to sign a concession agreement with CM Port to operate Hamban Port as a private-public partnership, a PPP, project, which a 70% stake of the port is leased to CM Port. The remaining 30% of the stake is owned by Sri Lankan Port Authority, and the commercial operations of the port are handled by CM Port and the SLPA, the Sri Lankans, jointly, while the government of Sri Lanka still owns the port. At the time of entering into the lease agreement, Hambantota Port was valued at $1.14 billion, and CM Port invested $1.1 billion as per the terms of the agreement. So a common and popular myth is that Sri Lanka was unable to pay off the loan it obtained to construct the port, thus it was handed over to China. However, by the time Sri Lankan government entered into the agreement with CM Port to lease Hamban Port, the debt servicing cost pertaining to the loans obtained from China Exim Bank to construct the port did not amount to much. Those loan installments amounted to less than 5% of Sri Lanka's total foreign debt repayments. Furthermore, loan repayments pertaining to the second phase of Hambantota Port project were yet to start at the time. A more serious concern pertaining to foreign debt servicing cost was the maturity of sovereign bonds, which amounted to more than 40% of the total servicing debt. So, as you can see, I'm not going to read any further. It's a very boring financial commercial exchange. But this is from the Diplomat. So it's not like that was from the Communist Party. That's from a probably right-leaning sort of classical liberal kind of perspective about the exchange. So the idea that, firstly, China has taken control of this port is inaccurate and not true. It's still owned and run by the Sri Lankans. There is they did build it. There is debt involved, sure, but it is still a Sri Lankan port. So yeah, this idea that of the airport now in Uganda also being taken over by China is in the same vein inaccurate. I'm not going to read you the statement from the Chinese government, but it's in the same vein. It's a very easy sort of low-hanging fruit that particularly sort of American leftists have started to pick up on, and they're not realizing that the original people that pushed this narrative, it was Pompeo. Mike Pompeo was the first person to raise this thing, and Mike Pence was the first person to talk about this thing of the port and debt trap diplomacy. So people that pick up these talking points about China using debt to trap people and taking control of infrastructure are, firstly using the sort of most extreme of versions of Republican talking points, but also you look at the details, it's rubbish. There's no substance to it.
Yeah, it's IMF. That's the one that's the West has always been doing it. First of all, and I would just recommend everyone to check out. Obviously, I don't know the exact title of the event, but on YouTube, it was like a speech given by a former vice president of Liberia, who was an alumni at not vice president, one of the higher senior advisors, the previous Liberian government. Who was an alumni in the Chicago University. It was a 2-hour talk about his experience when with China versus the West, essentially. So understand that Liberia is a country that was modeled after the United States, intended as a U.S. colony.
Yeah.
So the senior member of that government, their class standing is obviously very bourgeois and petty bourgeois. And they are taught in Chicago University, where Milford Friedman, that's was the head, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
For such a person to essentially go on a 2-hour rant about not a rant, it was a fairly good speech about how China, even if you interpret it at its worst, with the worst and most suspicious and hostile intentions, it is still far, far away from imperialism, and it's not even close. So,
and
I recommend checking that out.
On the, I mean, just so we can mention in passing this tennis star story. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, it's called "Damn If You Do, Damn If You Don't" for the CPC, essentially. To not to leave the privacy of Peng Shuai alone would mean that they have killed her. That has made a genetic clone. That was one of the accusations on Twitter. But then to show the whole world that she's okay would be like invading the privacy of a citizen and effectively just be stalking a person at that point. So what do you do? Why? Because people really don't care about Peng Shuai, the individual person, or the specific case. What they care about is this kind of picture in their mind that China is this hyper technological, hyper Nazi dystopia, and essentially it's the way for them to kind of balance out their own psychology to feel better about their own miserable lives in the heart of imperialism. So to that we can just say these are pathetic scums, and they can they can rot in a dirt pile. That's what they can do.
Fair enough. Okay, so I think we should come up with our sort of closing remarks now, and just obviously we always like to talk about what communist parties and workers' parties around the world have said or what they're up to. This week was relatively quiet for CPs, to be honest. So the most important piece, which at least 3 different communist parties wrote about or mentioned, apart from sort of certain internal issues, was, of course, that on the 29th of November, the CP of Israel and other parties also made similar statements about solidarity with the Palestinian people. on the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. So I'm just going to quickly read to you the Israeli statement. It's quite short, so just enjoy this one. And yeah, so joint statement of communist and workers' parties on the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. So it says, we, the undersigned communist and workers' parties, on the International Day for Solidarity with the Palestinian people, call to end the ongoing Israeli occupation of all occupied Palestinian and Arab lands and the establishment of the independent Palestinian state on the borders of June 4th, 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital, as well as implementing a solution to the refugee crisis in accordance with the UN Resolution 194. We express our support of the Palestinian political detainees and prisoners and of their fight for freedom and call for the immediate release of all political detainees and prisoners. We condemn the Israeli government's policies of occupation and settlements and the continuous dismantling of the geographical continuity of the future Palestinian state's sovereign lands, and all the imperialist and Zionist machinations aiming at eliminating the Palestinian cause. We demand the immediate dismantling of all Israeli illegal settlements and the apartheid wall in the occupied Palestinian territories. We denounce the long-term US administration's support to the Israeli war and occupation policies, the hypocritical attitude of the EU of equating the victims and the perpetrators, and we denounce the escalation witnessed since its aggression less than 6 months ago, escalation in the settlers' daily aggression and attacks of civilians, farmers, and activists to break the spirit of the Palestinian popular resistance. We support the just fight of the people of occupied Jerusalem in Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan, and we denounce the machinations to uproot them from their homes and lands. We condemn the reactionary Arab regime's normalization with Israel, fostered by the US and the imperialist machinations in the region. These are not peace agreements, but a validation of Israel and the US's policies to more resource exploitation and military and economic hegemony in the region. We condemn the continuous Israeli aggression on Syria and Lebanon and its involvement in undermining their sovereignty. We condemn the joint military maneuvers between Israel, Turkey, Greece, and Cyprus, and most recently several Gulf countries, coordinated by NATO and MEAN to terror the peoples of the region and guard the imperialist interests, adding new sources of conflict in the wider region. The parties undersigned denounce the latest escalation of outlawing the 6 human rights organizations and the continuing Israeli occupation and all atrocities against all economic, political, and democratic rights of the Palestinian people. The people that are undersigned for that, so there's 37 undersigned, CP of Australia, Belgium, Brazil, Britain, Canada, Croatia, Bohemia and Moravia, Denmark, France, Germany, Greece, India, Marxist, Iraq, Kurdistan, Iran, Ireland, Israel, of course, Jordan, Kazakhstan, Luxembourg, Mexico, Pakistan, Palestine, Paraguay, Philippines, Portugal, another party I'm not sure of, Serbia, Yugoslavia, apparently there's a new communist Yugoslavia, Spain,
Excuse me.
Swaziland, Sweden, Turkey, Ukraine, and the USA. And of course, another one is a communist front from Italy. So yeah, a pretty comprehensive shared agreement there, a statement. Yeah, I think anyone who calls himself a Marxist or a socialist or a leftist can agree with pretty much everything in that document. And that's from the CP of Israel. So it's good to hear that at least on the Israeli side, we do have some comrades who stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people. Yeah, I think actually I quite like the piece about EU hypocrisy and equating the victims with the perpetrators and calling it an apartheid wall. Some good, strong, hard-hitting terminology there. But any closing thoughts on that one then, Jen?
Well, as U.S. imperialism declines, I mean, Netanyahu himself has already spoken about his concerns of the continuation of the Israeli imperialist state. He didn't call it that, but we know. Why? Because everything that Israel does is funded. Okay, and the reason that they haven't gone into bankruptcy is because the United States just pays it all. So, for example, the Iron Dome rockets, I believe, the rocket defense system.
Sure.
So, like for Hamas to fire one rocket on them would only take like anywhere from $20 to $200 per shot. The Iron Dome rocket, $100,000 plus dollars per round.
Right.
But why hasn't Israel gone bankrupt yet? Well, because the United States pays for it every year in their defense aid package to Israel.
Yeah.
So, if Israel continues to be imperialist like this, and the United States, which is not going to get itself out of this situation, well, it's going to end very badly, and it is up to the communist comrades and the proletariat people of Israel to essentially, stop it. I cannot put it any more simply. But they are, whether or not they realize it or not, from a communist theoretical perspective, they are the reason that essentially they are the progressive hope for Israeli people. They need to be up for that challenge. I don't know much about them, so I can't speak on that. But I hope they will be up to the task. Because that's essentially the only legitimate way for the Israeli people to continue to exist as Israeli people instead of the imperialist apartheid state of Israel.
Sure,
right?
Sure. Yeah, no, I'm glad that we've used the terminology. We should describe it as it is. It's a deep perversion in that sense. An apartheid state, an imperialist colony / apartheid state, a settler state. It's a lot of adjectives, but that's kind of our show this week. We've covered a lot, and we'll be back next week, same time, to go over the news. So thank you for everyone who's been watching, and we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot, Jin.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.